As America's economy roars ahead, tonight we bring you the truth about the man who says he wants to take us back. Evening, everyone, and welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism, pro-worker, pro-family, pro-community. On Friday, more confirmation that the central promise of the Trump revolution to get the economy moving again is being delivered. Growth up, investment up, incomes up. It is an incredible performance for this stage of an economic expansion and is the direct result of this administration's pro-enterprise policy agenda. This is Donald Trump's blue-collar boom, delivering historic results for working Americans, exactly as he promised. Meanwhile, this week, we also saw the launch of a presidential campaign built on a pledge to go back to the pre-Trump era, the era of slow growth and wage stagnation. And that's where we start tonight, with the man who wants to take America back to all that. After months of dithering, after pathetically fishing around for a pre-picked VP like Stacey Abrams, after telling us with that move that he himself believes he is too old, too white, too male and too establishment to win his party's nomination, Joe Biden has finally entered the race for 2020. He says he wants to take America back to normal. Well, tonight, we will show you what Joe Biden's normal really looks like. We'll give you the facts that not only reveal his political vulnerability, but which, by the Democrats' own standards, make him unfit for the presidency and which should disqualify his candidacy. Joe Biden is tonight's Swamp Watch. In 2016, Americans voted against the establishment, and since then, as they've seen the establishment close ranks to undermine President Trump at every turn, the rage against the swamp machine has, if anything, increased. Now, the establishment wants its power back. They're running Joe Biden for president, and it is literally impossible to think of a more establishment politician than him. He is the very definition of a corrupt insider. Biden's been a professional politician for nearly 50 years, and what a record he's built in that time. We know Biden is sexist. His creepy habit of inappropriate touching shows that while he may not actively discriminate against women, in his soul, as he might say, he views women as lesser than men. And of course, his creepy cleanup video didn't fool anyone. It's the same with race. Just listen to how he talks about people from a different racial background.
I mean, you got the first sort of mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man. In Delaware, the largest growth in population is Indian Americans moving from India. You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.
Again, let's be precise about the point. I'm not saying Biden believes in racial discrimination, but anyone who speaks like that in his soul clearly thinks black and brown people are lesser than white people. We know Joe Biden is verbally incontinent and can barely open his mouth without putting his foot in it. But the thing that is less well known is how irredeemably swampy Biden is. Just for his own use, he has taken $29 million in donations since 1989. That's as far back as the data goes. All those millions mean favors for special interests. Here's just a few highlights from his swampy career. Biden loves to tout his foreign policy experience, and yes, he has plenty of experience with foreign governments, or should I say, their lobbyists. Foreign government lobbying, one of the most inexcusable swamp practices, was all part of the job for Joe Biden when he was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He took money from lobbyists for Dubai, for the United Arab Emirates, for Ethiopia, for Sri Lanka, for China. More on that later. And yes, for Turkey. Turkey, I seem to remember Democrats getting rather upset when Michael Flynn was accused of lobbying and Turkey. But the biggest payoff for Biden during his time in the Senate came from credit card company MBNA. His craven backing for MBNA in exchange for their cash even earned Biden the nickname the Senator from MBNA. In 2005, Biden backed a bankruptcy bill that protected banks and credit card companies while hurting middle-class families. Biden might say, well, MBNA are headquartered in Delaware. I represent Delaware in the Senate. Of course I'm going to help them. But if it's a senator's job to help businesses based in their state, why do you need to be paid millions of dollars extra to do it? The simple truth is that Biden sided with his donors against working Americans. And that's the real story of his life. His entire office was infested by swampiness. His legislative assistant, Tracy Becker, became a lobbyist for MWW Group. His political director, Ankit Desai, became a lobbyist at the same firm before becoming a lobbyist for Cheniere Energy. Biden's chief counsel became a lobbyist at Mayer Brown in 2008. Biden brought him back to work as an advisory board member for the Obama-Biden transition team. Great. Biden's policy advisor, Michael Haltzel, became a lobbyist for DLA Piper, his deputy chief of staff as vice president. Alan Hoffman became the chief lobbyist for PepsiCo before becoming a lobbyist for Herbalife International. On and on it goes. Round and round it spins. Joe Biden's revolving door. 5 decades of favor trading, influence peddling, and corruption. So swampy. But so what? Some might say. They're all like that. Yes, they are. But there's one more thing about Biden. This is what makes him dangerous. This is what should disqualify him from the presidency. Since 2016, the Democrats and their establishment media allies have relentlessly accused President Trump of being a foreign agent or being compromised by a foreign power. Watch.
Well, I certainly think he's acting like someone who's compromised, and it may very well be that he is compromised, or it may very well be that he believes that he's compromised.
Unfortunately, because our commander-in-chief is compromised.
And do you believe it's possible that President Trump has been compromised by Russia?
They're still saying it, even though the Mueller investigation concluded that it was all a lie. With Joe Biden, on the other hand, there is a much more worrying relationship with a foreign power, one that represents a vastly bigger threat to America than Russia does. China. In December 2013, then Vice President Biden rode Air Force Two on an official trip to Asia. Tensions were high over disputed territories in the East China Sea. Biden was joined by his son, Hunter, who was building a private equity firm along with his business partner and friend, Chris Heinz, heir of the Heinz ketchup family fortune and son-in-law of then Secretary of State John Kerry. Vice President Biden and Hunter Biden were ushered into Beijing on a red carpet with a delegation of Chinese officials. From there, Joe went straight into meetings with the Vice President of China and President Xi Jinping. The next morning, the Bidens had a meeting with the U.S.-China Business Council. From there, it was off to Villa number 5 of the Diaoqiu State Guest House, where Madame Mao lived during the Cultural Revolution. Joe Biden struck a soft, friendly tone with the Chinese leadership, disappointing allies in the area like Japan, who were alarmed by China's increasing aggression. But perhaps Joe had other issues beside the global balance of power on his mind, issues like his son's business deals. Hunter's presence on the trip was far from coincidence. Just 10 days later, his company, Rosemont Seneca, signed an exclusive $1 billion deal with the state-owned Bank of China, creating an investment fund called Bohai Harvest, with money backed by the Chinese government. In the words of Peter Schweitzer, who first unveiled these conflicts of interest in his book Secret Empires, the Chinese government was literally funding a business that it co-owned along with the sons of 2 of America's most powerful decision-makers. This is what it looks like to be compromised by a foreign power. And that deal was far from a one-off. In 2011, less than a year after opening his company, Hunter Biden was in China working with a company called Thornton Group to explore business opportunities with Chinese state-owned enterprises. Thornton Group touted the meetings on their Chinese language website, saying Chinese executives, quote, extended their warm welcome to the Thornton Group with its U.S. partner Rosemont Seneca chairman Hunter Biden, brackets, second son of the now Vice President Joe Biden. Here's a screen grab of that web post, captured by the Government Accountability Institute. It features a number of photos of Hunter Biden posing with powerful Chinese officials. Thornton Group was marketing their access to the son of the vice president to attract business with China. But guess what? The write-up and pictures of those meetings on Thornton Group's Chinese language website did not appear on their English language website. Oh, and here's another curious fact. These meetings occurred just hours before Vice President Joe Biden met with the Chinese president in Washington. In May that same year, Hunter had a second meeting with many of the same Chinese financial powerhouses, just 2 weeks after his dad, the vice president, opened up the U.S.-China strategic dialogue with Chinese officials in Washington. And in 2014, another arm of Hunter's company, Rosemont Realty, began negotiating multi-billion-dollar deals with Gemini Investments, a Chinese firm with ties to the China Ocean Shipping Company, which reportedly operates as an extension of the Chinese military. But it's not even just China. A recent court case gave us a close look at the financial statements of Rosemont Seneca Bohai. Most of the money going out of that account was to Hunter Biden. Wait till you see where some of the money going into it came from. $145,000 from a Kazakh oligarch, $1 million from Chinese entities, of course, $1.2 million from a mysterious LLC tied to a Swiss bank that's been implicated in money laundering, and $3.1 million from corrupt Ukrainian oligarchs. Speaking of corruption in Ukraine, recent reporting by investigative journalist John Solomon revealed that in March 2016, when Ukraine's chief prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, conducted a wide-ranging corruption probe into the natural gas firm Burisma Holdings, of which Hunter Biden, who else, was a board member, his father Joe threatened to withhold $1 billion in loan guarantees from the U.S. government unless that prosecutor was fired. Look, Joe Biden has been through family tragedy that, to me, seems unendurable, and he's handled it with obvious strength and grace. But he's putting himself forward for the Oval Office, not Oprah. He must be accountable for his actions and the swampiness we've shown you tonight. Joe Biden obviously loves his children and would do anything for them. I feel the same way about mine. But when you're the vice president, you can't run around doing favors for America's enemies to help make money for your son. Think of all the breathless bloviating these past 2 years about Jared's property dealings and Ivanka's business in China and Moscow Trump hotels that never got built. Most of it, by the way, before Donald Trump became president, and none of it obviously influencing policy, since this president has been much tougher on Russia than Obama ever was, and is the first president to stand up to China in about 50 years. By contrast, these Biden deals were real. They happened. Literally billions of dollars paid over by the Chinese government to Biden companies when Joe Biden was vice president and when Joe Biden went soft on China. Effectively countering China's rise is the single most important strategic challenge for the next president. How can Joe Biden possibly do that when the Chinese government has been funding Biden family businesses? Just on the basis of what we already know, by the standards the Democrats have set for Donald Trump, Joe Biden is compromised by a foreign power and unfit to be president. But there's a lot more we need to know. What went on in those Beijing meetings in Villa number 5? What promises were made? What favors were exchanged? Why did Joe Biden go soft on China when its aggression and our allies demanded a tough response? To borrow Nancy Pelosi's words, what does China have on Joe Biden, politically, personally, or financially? Here's the bottom line about Joe Biden. He is a fake and a phony. Tomorrow he launches his campaign in a union hall to brand himself a man of the working people. Don't let him fool you. He's trading on a reputation that hasn't been true for decades. When it came to a choice between working Americans and his donors, he chose the donors. When it came to a choice between working Americans and China, he chose China. He may have started out as a blue-collar boy from Scranton, Pennsylvania, but he ended up as a swampy stooge for Beijing, China. Joe Biden is Joe China, and he must never be allowed anywhere near the White House again. Now, this is important information, and we need your help to let everyone know about it. We will post this on Twitter and Facebook, so please follow us at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC. And share tonight's Swamp Watch using the hashtag JoeChina. Thank you.